Hey everyone, I've noticed that many of you are enjoying the videos, but most of you haven't subscribed yet. We're super close to hitting 1,000 subscribers, and your support could help us reach that milestone. If you're enjoying the content, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It really makes a huge difference and helps us keep creating more awesome content. Thank you so much for watching and supporting. Beneath the surface, a husband's descent into revenge. It was supposed to be just another evening, one of those countless company events Lisa insisted I attend with her. Our presence together, arms linked, our smiles perfectly synchronized, was a public declaration of strength, stability. A testament to a decade of marriage that had withstood all storms. Except tonight, something was different. Something about the way Lisa's eyes lingered on her boss, Tom Weller, just a beat too long. The corners of her lips curled upward in a smile that wasn't quite the same one she gave me. Not forced or polite, but intimate, familiar. I couldn't shake it off. My gut tightened as I stood off to the side, half listening to a colleague drone on about quarterly earnings. Lisa's laugh, a sound I'd known as well as my own breath, rippled across the room. I glanced over, catching her and Tom exchanging another looks, this time with a hint of something darker. My skin prickled. Could it be? No, I banished the thought as soon as it surfaced. This was Lisa. My Lisa. Greg, you all right? Mark, an old friend from accounting, clapped a hand on my shoulder, forcing my attention back. Yeah, just thinking about work, I lied, offering a quick smile. Mark nodded and turned back to the conversation. I nodded along, but my eyes drifted to Lisa once more. She was talking animatedly, her face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in months. That smile, like the one she used to reserve for me. My throat tightened, but I told myself I was being paranoid, overreacting. I shoved the unease aside and joined her when the event wound down, smiling through the goodbyes and polite chit-chat. But on the drive home, the silence between us was deafening. Her phone buzzed a few times, but she ignored it, keeping her gaze fixed out the window. Unreadable. Was I imagining this distance, or had it been there for a while? The next few days passed like a fog. I tried to shake off that nagging feeling, rationalizing her smiles, her laughter as mere friendliness. But something had shifted. It was in the way she slipped into her bag a second too quickly when I entered the room. The way she started spending even more time at work, coming home late, whispering about deadlines and demanding clients. One night, I caught her checking her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. A smile ghosted across her lips, and she typed something quickly before sliding the phone under her pillow. I asked casually, trying to keep my voice steady, "Who's that?" "Just work stuff," she replied, not meeting my eyes. She leaned over and kissed my cheek, murmuring goodnight. But that night, as I lay beside her, listening to her steady breathing, my mind refused to settle. The thought, the one I'd buried so desperately, began to worm its way back in. I started noticing other things, little things. Lisa's gaze flickering to her phone during dinner, her subtle shift away when I reached for her hand, a vague, almost imperceptible barrier growing between us. Something had changed, and it wasn't just the usual stresses of work. A sickness spread through my chest, an anxiety that kept me awake long after she'd fallen asleep. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't believe it. This was my wife, the woman I'd built a life with, but doubt is a parasite. Once it takes root, it grows, feeds on every whispered suspicion, every tiny inconsistency. It was a Saturday morning when I found it, the receipt that shattered whatever illusions I still clung to. Lisa was in the shower, and I was searching through her purse for some loose change when I stumbled upon it. A single piece of paper neatly folded between her wallet and a set of keys. A dinner receipt from that swanky Italian place downtown, dated just a few days ago. And 2 entrees. The room spun. I pressed my fingers against my temples, fighting off the surge of nausea. She'd told me she was working late that night, that she had to finalize some project. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. She'd lied to my face. I dropped the receipt back into her bag and stumbled out of the room. My pulse thundered in my ears as I paced the kitchen, trying to quell the rising panic. When she finally emerged from the bathroom, I was at the stove, pretending to cook breakfast, my back turned to her. I couldn't face her just yet. I needed to think, to process. But my mind was a whirlwind of suspicions, accusations. "Hey," she greeted me softly, her voice carrying that same warmth I'd always loved, the one that now felt tainted. "Morning," I replied, forcing the word out. I handed her a cup of coffee, studying her face as she took it. Did she look different? Guilt-ridden? There was no sign, no flicker of regret, just that same practiced smile. "Long week, huh?" she sighed, glancing at her phone. Another text from work, no doubt. "Yeah, real long," I muttered, turning away before she could catch the bitterness in my voice. The rest of the weekend passed in a blur. Every time she left the room, I found myself reaching for her phone, fingers itching to unlock it and see what lay beneath. But I couldn't, not yet. I needed to be sure, so I waited, watched. On Monday evening, I made my move. Lisa had just texted me that she'd be working late again. I could barely type out a response, my hands trembling. I decided to test her, dialing her office line. 3 rings, 4, no answer. I hung up and tried her cell. It went straight to voicemail. My breath hitched, and a familiar darkness seeped in. So it's like that, huh? The phone buzzed just as I was about to throw it against the wall. Her name flashed across the screen. "Hey, sorry, babe, in a meeting," she said quickly, her voice cheerful, bright, too bright. "Right, a meeting," I echoed, struggling to keep my voice neutral. "Yeah, with Tom. You know how he is, always going over details at the last minute." There it was again. Tom. The name felt like poison on my tongue. "Sure, just wanted to check on you," I said, my voice calm, measured. "Thanks, Greg. You're the best. I'll be home late, okay? Love you." The words hit me like shards of glass. I almost laughed. She was good. Too good at this charade. Hanging up, I stared at the phone, my mind racing. This couldn't be a misunderstanding. It wasn't a mistake. I had my proof, flimsy as it was, but proof nonetheless. Lisa was hiding something, and now I was determined to find out what. The next few days, I played the role of the dutiful husband, supportive, attentive. But I was watching, waiting for her to slip. And the more I observed, the clearer it became. The way she tensed up when her phone buzzed after hours, the way she glanced over her shoulder when typing out messages, the forced laughter when I asked her about her day, every action, every word only deepened my conviction. By the end of the week, I had made up my mind. This was no longer about doubt or paranoia. Lisa was lying to me, betraying me, and I wasn't going to sit back and let it happen. No more second guessing. No more passive patience. I needed answers, and I'd get them, no matter what it took. Because if there was one thing I'd learned from the hollow look in her eyes that night, it was that the woman I loved was gone. In her place was someone I didn't recognize. Someone who needed to be exposed for what she really was. And I was just the man to do it. By the time I finished planning that weekend, I felt a strange sense of calm. Closure, I told myself. It was for closure. But deep down, I knew the truth. This was only the beginning. My focus sharpened in the days that followed. I knew I needed something more tangible, more incriminating than a few suspicious texts or a single receipt. Proof that couldn't be brushed off as paranoia or coincidence. But first, I had to understand the full scope of her betrayal. What else was she hiding? How long had it really been going on? And just how deep did Tom's involvement run? I spent hours studying Lisa's behavior with a meticulousness I hadn't even known I was capable of. Every smile, every slip of her hand into her purse to check her phone. It was like playing chess, learning to anticipate each move, each response. I began keeping a log on my laptop, notes about her patterns, her calls, and the timing of her arrivals and departures. But this still wasn't enough. I needed more. A clear, undeniable image of her infidelity. Something that would shatter any lies or denials she might spin. So I decided to do something I'd never imagined doing in my life. I bugged her car. It wasn't a rash decision. I weighed the risks, the morality of it. But in the end, I didn't hesitate. I convinced myself it was justified, necessary even. After all, wasn't it her deceit that had driven me to this point? This wasn't spying. This was survival. I'd been pushed into a corner, and the only way out was to fight my way back into the light. The device was discreet, small enough to tuck away under her dashboard. It would record both audio and GPS data, tracking her every movement and conversation. I told myself that if she wasn't lying, if she was truly being faithful, I'd take it out. No harm, no foul. But deep down, I knew the truth. I knew what I'd find. The first few days offered nothing but mundane conversations. She spoke to a colleague about some project, laughed with a friend over lunch. For a moment, I almost let myself hope. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe this was all a tragic misunderstanding. But then, on the third day, I heard it, the crack in her voice that set everything in motion. It started innocuously enough. Lisa's voice, smooth and controlled, speaking about some deadline. Then a shift, a softer tone. "I miss you too," she whispered. "I can't wait to see you again." I froze, the words searing into my brain like a brand. My heart pounded, every muscle in my body tightening. I turned up the volume, leaning closer as if proximity would somehow make her words less real, less damning. "Last night was amazing," she murmured. There was a pause, then a low laugh. "You know what you do to me, Tom." I couldn't breathe. The room spun, and I gripped the edge of my desk to steady myself. Rage boiled in my veins, hot and fierce, threatening to consume me. But I didn't let it. Not yet. Instead, I hit replay. And then again. Each time the words etched themselves deeper until they were engraved into my skull. When the call ended, I sat there, staring at the monitor, numb. It was worse than I'd imagined. I'd suspected, sure, but hearing her say those things, it was like a knife twisting in my gut. She wasn't just cheating, she was in love with him. My wife was in love with someone else. Something inside me snapped. I knew what I had to do. It wasn't enough to just catch them in the act or confront her with the recording. I needed to see it. To look them in the eye and watch them squirm, caught in the web of their own deceit. So I waited, watched. 3 days later, the opportunity presented itself. Lisa texted me that she'd be working late again. Another emergency meeting. I acted casual, pretending to buy her excuse and wished her luck. But the moment she stepped out of the house, I was in my car, tailing her at a safe distance. She didn't go to the office, not even close. Instead, she drove to a secluded spot on the outskirts of town, a place that looked more like a lover's rendezvous than a professional setting. My hands clenched around the steering wheel as I parked down the street, my pulse a relentless drumbeat in my ears. I turned on the camera I'd hidden in her car, watching the live feed on my phone as she sat there waiting. It wasn't long before another car pulled up beside hers. Tom Weller's sleek black BMW. The passenger door opened, and he slipped inside, leaning over to kiss her. I watched, breathless, as Lisa melted into his arms, her hands threading through his hair. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a surrender, a total giving in, one that she'd denied me for months. I zoomed in, focusing on the way her fingers caressed his face, the way she smiled against his lips. That same smile she'd given me years ago, when we first fell in love. I wanted to scream, to tear into that car and drag her out by her hair, to demand how she could throw everything away for him, a man who probably didn't even care about her beyond the thrill of the forbidden. But I didn't. I stayed still, icy calm, letting the scene burn itself into my memory. They talked after, whispered words, promises of more nights like this one, and then they drove off, leaving me alone in the dark, suffocated by a silence that echoed with their betrayal. I couldn't follow them. Not yet. I had enough. Back home, I watched the footage again and again, the pain morphing into something sharper, more focused. Lisa thought she was clever, that she could play me for a fool and get away with it, but she didn't realize who she was dealing with. This wasn't going to end with a few heated words or some pathetic plea for forgiveness. I was done being the nice guy, done being the understanding husband. It was time to show her just how deep the consequences of her actions would cut. The next morning, I confronted her. "Lisa," I said softly, sitting at the kitchen table as she prepared her coffee, "I need to ask you something." "Hmm?" She glanced at me over her shoulder, brow furrowed. "What's up? Are you seeing someone else?" The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. She froze, the mug halfway to her lips. Her eyes widened, a flash of guilt and panic crossing her face before she masked it with a confused smile. "What? Of course not, Greg. Where is this coming from?" I stood, pulling my phone from my pocket. Her gaze followed the movement, her smile faltering. I tapped the screen, playing the recording. Her voice filled the room, mingling with Tom's. Every lie, every deceit, exposed in seconds. The blood drained from her face. "Greg, I can explain." "Don't!" I cut her off, my voice ice cold. "Don't you dare. I've seen it, Lisa." I saw everything. She swallowed hard, backing up a step, as if I were some stranger she'd never known. Maybe I was. Maybe that's what this had turned me into. It's not what it looks like. Tom and I, don't insult me, I growled, stepping closer. Don't you dare try to spin this. I know exactly what you've been doing. Every kiss, every touch. I leaned in, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. Did you even think about me? About us? Or was it all just a game to you? Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't care. I didn't flinch. She reached out, a trembling hand brushing against my arm. Greg, I'm sorry. Save it, I snapped, jerking away. You've been lying to me for months. Do you know what that feels like? To wake up every day and wonder if the person you love is out there screwing someone else? Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. It was over. The woman I loved was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. I took a step back, letting the distance between us grow. This ends now, I said, my voice stone. You can pack your things and leave, or I'll do it for you. Please, Greg, we can talk about this. No, Lisa, we're done talking. I turned away, heading for the door. You've already thrown us away. There's nothing left to say. But as I walked out, one thought remained, clear and unyielding. I wasn't just walking away. I was preparing for something bigger. Something that would make her regret every choice, every betrayal. Because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. After Lisa left, I sat alone in the house that used to feel like a home. The silence was suffocating, my thoughts swirling like a relentless storm. I tried to focus, to piece together every moment that led to this point. How did I miss it? How long had she been lying to me, making a fool out of me? I ran my hands through my hair, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. None of that mattered anymore. The only thing that mattered now was what I did next. My mind, once consumed by shock and heartbreak, sharpened with a new clarity, a cold, precise resolve that I hadn't felt in years. It was time to make them pay. Not just Lisa, but Tom too. They needed to feel what it was like to be torn apart, humiliated, and left with nothing. The way I felt now, but to do that I needed a plan, something thorough, methodical. This couldn't be a reckless act of revenge that would burn out quickly. No, I wanted it to be slow, painful, and inescapable. I pulled out a notepad and started writing, jotting down every detail I could think of. Step one was understanding every aspect of their lives, finding out what they valued most, and then destroying it. I started with Lisa. We'd been married for 10 years, shared a house, bank accounts, even had investments together. I knew her better than she knew herself, or at least I thought I did. She was always cautious about money, obsessed with saving and making sure our finances were in perfect order. So I'd hit her where it hurt, financially. I spent the rest of the night combing through our accounts, making a list of what I could liquidate, withdraw, or freeze without raising any red flags. Next came Tom. I didn't know much about him outside of what Lisa had told me over the years, details that now seemed laughably trivial. His wife's name was Emily, no kids. He'd been married before, divorced. His reputation at the company was solid, dependable, competent, but a little arrogant. The kind of guy who prided himself on his image. So that's where I'd start. I needed to know his weaknesses, his dirty secrets, anything that could be used to rip his life apart. With that in mind, I did what any curious husband might do. I hacked into his email. It took a few hours of trying different variations of passwords, but eventually, I got in. And what I found was better than I could have hoped for. Tom wasn't just having an affair with Lisa. He had a history of affairs, stringing women along in different departments of the company, all while playing the dutiful husband to Emily. Emails were there, explicit exchanges that I copied and saved. Some were more than a year old. We'd be people with women who'd left the company or been transferred out under suspicious circumstances. But there was something else, something far more interesting. A string of emails between Tom and his lawyer discussing a potential merger between his company and a rival firm. The details were vague, but it was clear that Tom was pulling strings behind the scenes, keeping this a secret from his own company. If I could expose this, it would not only ruin his career but potentially lead to legal repercussions. I leaned back, satisfaction flooding through me. I wasn't just going to destroy his personal life, I was going to dismantle everything he'd built, brick by brick. But first, I needed more information. A plan of this magnitude required careful execution. I needed to know every move Lisa and Tom made, every connection they had. That's when I decided to dig deeper. I took a few days off work, told them I wasn't feeling well, easy enough since I looked like hell, and used the time to gather more intel. I rented a car, a nondescript gray sedan that wouldn't draw attention, and started following them. I tailed Lisa from work, watched as she met with Tom at their usual spots, observed their routine from a distance. The more I watched, the clearer it became. This wasn't a casual fling. This was serious. They had their own world, their own plans, ones that didn't include me. And that's when something unexpected happened. One evening, as I sat in my car outside a dimly lit cafe where they were meeting, I noticed someone else watching them too. A woman mid-30s, dressed in a plain black jacket, stood across the street, her gaze fixed on the same window I was staring at. Her posture was tense, shoulders hunched as if she was trying to make herself invisible. I waited, curious. And then she pulled out her phone and took a series of photos. Quick, precise. She wasn't just a casual observer. She was documenting. For a moment, I thought she might be a private investigator, someone hired by the company or by Tom's wife. But then she turned and I caught a glimpse of her face. Pale, drawn, with a hardened edge to her expression that seemed all too familiar. Emily, Tom's wife. I hadn't expected her to be here, hadn't even considered that she might be watching them too. But as I saw her standing there in the shadows, I realized she must have known for a while, just like me. A strange sense of solidarity washed over me, and I debated approaching her, telling her that I knew, that we were in this together. But I stopped myself. No, not yet. I needed to be certain. I needed to understand where she stood. The next day I received an email. No subject line, no signature. Just a single sentence. We need to talk. Attached was a phone number. I knew instantly who it was from. When I called, Emily picked up on the first ring. "Greg," she said, her voice tight with a mix of fear and anger. "I think we have a lot to discuss." We met at a small park outside of town, far away from prying eyes. She looked even worse up close, dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a careless ponytail. There was no small talk, no preamble. She launched straight into it. "How long have you known?" she demanded. "Not long," I replied evenly. "A few weeks. You?" "Months," she whispered, shaking her head. "I found out months ago, but I didn't know what to do. Tom, he's not the man I thought I married. I tried to confront him once, but he just lied. Said I was imagining things." She paused, taking a deep breath. "But then I found more evidence. Texts, emails. That's when I knew I had to gather everything to build a case." I studied her, weighing my options. This could complicate things, but it could also be an opportunity. "Emily, what are you planning to do?" "I want to ruin him," she said quietly, her voice trembling with barely restrained rage. "I want him to lose everything. His job, his reputation. He thinks he's untouchable, that he can do whatever he wants. But I'm not going to let him get away with it. Neither am I said softly. She blinked, her eyes narrowing. Then we should work together. It was almost too good to be true. But as I looked at her, I realized she was serious. She had nothing left to lose, just like me. And together we could bring them both down in ways neither of us could alone. We spent the next few days planning, sharing what we knew. She had access to his personal finances, his professional contacts. I had the footage, the emails. We started small, just as I'd intended. Anonymous tips sent to his company, his colleagues, hinting at impropriety. I could see the impact almost immediately. Whispers spread through the office. Employees started to view Tom differently. Meetings were suddenly canceled, and I noticed he was spending more time on the phone arguing in hushed tones. But I wanted more than just professional fallout. I wanted personal destruction, so we started leaking details to their social circles, Lisa's friends, Tom's acquaintances. I'd never realized how quickly people turn when they smell blood in the water. Everyone wanted to be the first to know, the first to share the juicy details of the affair. Their names were whispered at dinner parties, murmured about in office quarters. Lisa started coming home late, eyes red from crying. Tom looked haggard, his normally polished appearance slipping. And Emily, with her calm, unyielding demeanor, simply watched it all unfold. I thought she'd falter, that she'd back out once things started getting ugly. But she didn't. She was just as relentless as I was, pushing me to go further, to expose more. One evening I found her waiting outside my house. Her face was pale, eyes wide with something close to panic. "I just found something," she said breathlessly, holding up her phone. "Something you need to see." She handed me the screen and I scanned the document she'd pulled up. An old email thread between Lisa and Tom. My blood ran cold as I read it. References to doctor's visits, medical procedures. And then, a single line that felt like a slap to the face. "I'm sorry about the baby, Tom, but it's for the best. We can't risk everything for a mistake." I looked up at Emily, a question hanging between us. Her lips trembled as she nodded. "Lisa was pregnant," she whispered. "And she ended it because of him." It felt like the world tilted on its axis, everything I thought I knew crumbling to dust. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was about something far darker, far more twisted. And in that moment, I knew there was no turning back. "Let's finish this," I murmured, the words tasting like poison on my tongue. Emily nodded. "Let's make them pay." Emily and I wasted no time. With the new revelation about Lisa's pregnancy, our motivation was sharpened to a razor's edge. We were no longer just avenging the betrayal. We were punishing them for the life they had taken from us. And it was time to execute our plan, meticulously designed to dismantle their world piece by piece. First, we targeted their professional lives. Using Emily's access to Tom's work calendar and contacts, I crafted a series of emails that would plant seeds of doubt within the company's board members and senior leadership. The emails hinted at financial misconduct, subtle enough to seem plausible, yet vague enough to remain untraceable. I sent them from a throwaway account, attaching snippets of Tom's secret emails about the merger. I knew they'd start asking questions, pushing him into a corner he couldn't easily escape. The effect was immediate. Within days, I saw the cracks forming. Tom's name started circulating in whispered conversations at the office. People who usually greeted him with nods and handshakes now watched him warily, their gazes laced with suspicion. His authority, the one thing he prided himself on, was beginning to erode. "Did you hear?" one of his colleagues murmured in the hallway as I listened in, hiding around the corner. "I heard the board's planning an emergency meeting, something about Tom's handling of company finances." I smiled grimly. That was just the beginning. Next came Lisa's turn. She'd always been fastidious about her reputation, carefully curating her image as a dependable professional and loving wife. But with Emily's help, we slipped compromising photos, screenshots from their secret rendezvous, into a group chat she shared with several of her friends. The backlash was swift and brutal. Her phone blew up with accusatory messages, demands for explanations. Friends who had once gushed over her accomplishments now turned on her, their thin veneer of civility shattering in an instant. I watched her unravel from a distance, saw her fumbling attempts to apologize and explain, but it was too late. Her betrayal, broadcasted and undeniable, was a scarlet letter she couldn't erase. Soon she was avoiding social events, claiming to be overwhelmed with work, but I knew the truth. She was hiding, ashamed to face the people who'd once admired her. Lisa came home one night, her face pale and drawn. She barely spoke to me, just mumbled something about needing space. But there was a flicker of something else in her eyes, something almost like fear. I pretended to be concerned, asking if everything was okay, but inwardly I relished every second of it. Just some drama at work, she muttered, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. It'll pass. It won't, I thought, not until I'm done. But there was more to do. Personal humiliation was one thing, but I wanted them broken, truly broken, and that required me to go deeper, to uncover every secret, every vulnerability they tried to hide. Emily proved invaluable here. She had years' worth of information about Tom's financials, private dealings, and even a few questionable investments he'd made on the side. We compiled everything into a dossier, complete with annotated notes and timelines, and sent it to the compliance department of his company. The fallout was spectacular. Tom was put on immediate leave pending an internal investigation. His position, once so secure, so untouchable, crumbled overnight. Rumors of embezzlement and insider trading spread like wildfire. Emily told me he barely left the house now, trapped inside as calls and emails flooded in, demanding explanations he couldn't give. He'd gone from a respected executive to a pariah almost overnight. I think he's going to break, Emily whispered one evening over the phone, her voice tinged with a strange mixture of excitement and dread. He hasn't been sleeping, hasn't even touched his phone in days. Good, I replied flatly. But we're not finished. There was still Lisa. I wasn't satisfied with being her quiet withdrawal from society. I wanted her to feel the full weight of her choices, to realize that she'd destroyed something far greater than herself. So I decided to turn her own family against her. I drafted a letter, carefully worded and filled with false concern. It detailed how worried I was about Lisa's mental state following the affair, hinting at erratic behavior and possible substance abuse. Then I sent it to her parents, framing it as a desperate plea for help. The response was immediate. They called her nonstop, bombarding her with questions, accusations. They demanded that she get help, convinced that she was spiraling out of control. I watched as her defenses crumbled, as she tried to deny everything, only to be met with disbelief and anger. The satisfaction I felt was hollow, but I pushed that aside. I told myself it was necessary, that I was restoring balance, taking back control. But every time I saw the way her shoulders hunched when she thought I wasn't looking, the way her voice trembled when she spoke on the phone with her parents, I felt a strange pang of something else. Guilt? Regret? I couldn't be sure. I shoved it down, focusing on the next step, but Emily was wavering. One night she called me, her voice strained. Greg, we've done so much already, haven't we? I mean, they're suffering. They've lost so much. Maybe it's enough? I clenched my jaw, fighting back the surge of anger. She was getting cold feet. I should have expected this. Enough? I snapped. Emily, they took everything from us. This isn't about making them suffer a little. It's about destroying them. I know, but she hesitated, and I could almost hear the tears brimming in her eyes. Tom's a wreck. He's lost his job, his friends, and Lisa. She's not even talking to anyone. You're backing out? I cut in, my voice low and dangerous. No, she whispered. I need time to think. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Fine, but remember, Emily, if we stop now, it's all been for nothing. All of it. She was silent for a long moment. I understand, but I hung up, tossing the phone onto the couch. This was bad. If Emily pulled out now, it could ruin everything. I needed her, her access, her leverage. Without her, Tom would be able to pick up the pieces, maybe even bounce back. That couldn't happen, not after everything I'd done. The following week was tense. Emily didn't contact me, and I was left to work alone. I took it as a sign that I needed to escalate on my own terms. So I made my next move. I leaked the pregnancy emails to Tom's board members. I knew it would tear him apart, revealing his indiscretions and insensitivity in the most brutal way possible. The result was devastating. Tom's company severed ties with him completely. His financial assets were frozen pending further investigation. His marriage, already hanging by a thread, disintegrated when Emily confronted him about the emails. I wasn't there to see it, but I could imagine the scene. Tom, pleading, trying to explain, and Emily standing there, her face a mask of cold resolve. I got a call from her that evening. Her voice was eerily calm, but I could hear the exhaustion beneath it. "It's done," she said quietly. "Tom's gone. I filed for divorce this morning." I closed my eyes, a sense of finality settling over me. "And Lisa?" She's not doing well," Emily admitted. "I think she's having some sort of breakdown. Her family's talking about getting her into a rehab facility." I should have felt triumphant. This was what I'd wanted, wasn't it? To leave her with nothing, and yet... "Greg," Emily said softly, "maybe it's time to end this, for real. No more emails, no more leaks. We've both lost so much. Maybe it's time to let go." I opened my mouth to argue, to tell her that it wasn't over yet, but something in her voice stopped me. She sounded so tired, so broken. Maybe she was right. Maybe I'd gone too far, crossed lines I couldn't come back from. "Maybe, well," I murmured, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. After we hung up, I stared at the ceiling for a long time, my mind churning with conflicting thoughts. Was this really it? Was I done? The next morning, I got a call from Lisa's mother. She was frantic, her voice thick with panic. "Greg, it's Lisa. She's gone. We don't know where she is." A cold, hollow sensation spread through me. Gone? We think she might have done something. To herself. Her mother's voice broke into sobs. I felt a strange detachment as I listened, a numbness settling in. This was it, the consequence of everything I'd set in motion. I should have felt victorious, but all I felt was emptiness. Had I really wanted this? Had I wanted her gone? Or had I just wanted her to suffer, to feel as trapped and lost as I had? I hung up, staring blankly at the phone. Somehow I'd won, and somehow I'd lost everything in the process. The call from Lisa's mother hung in the air like a noose, tightening around my chest. She was gone. But where? Had she run away, or had she... I shook the thought from my head, grabbing my keys and heading out the door. I needed answers, not speculation. I drove aimlessly for hours, replaying every conversation, every moment we'd shared in those last few weeks. I kept expecting my phone to ring, for someone to tell me she'd been found, that it was all a misunderstanding. But the silence was suffocating, broken only by the hollow thrum of the car engine and the steady drumming of my fingers against the steering wheel. Lisa's disappearance was an unexpected twist. It wasn't supposed to end like this. The plan was to leave her ruined and alone, watching helplessly as everything she'd built crumbled around her. I'd imagined her living out her days in the wreckage of our life, a constant reminder of what she'd lost. But this felt unfinished. Hours later, I found myself parked outside Tom's house, my fingers clenched tight around the steering wheel. His car was in the driveway, the windows of the house dark and uninviting. I hadn't intended to come here, hadn't even realized I was driving in this direction until I saw his street sign. But now that I was here, I knew what I needed to do. I stepped out of the car, the chill of the evening air biting at my skin. Each step toward the front door felt heavy, weighted with all the words I'd left unsaid. I rang the doorbell once, then again. Nothing. I pounded on the door, my fist hammering against the wood until I thought it might break. Finally, the door swung open. Tom stood there, disheveled and bleary-eyed, his face a mask of confusion and barely contained anger. "What the hell are you doing here, Greg?" he spat, his voice low and dangerous. "Haven't you done enough?" I shoved past him, ignoring his protest as I stormed into the living room. The place was a mess, paper strewn across the floor, empty bottles littering the coffee table. He looked like hell, his shirt rumpled and hair sticking up at odd angles, but I didn't care. "Where is she?" I demanded, my voice sharp and unyielding. Tom blinked, then narrowed his eyes. "Who? What are you talking about?" "Lisa," I growled. "She's gone. No one knows where she is, and I'm willing to bet you have something to do with it." "Gone?" Tom repeated, genuine confusion flickering across his face. "What do you mean, gone?" I stepped closer, jabbing a finger into his chest. "Don't play dumb, Tom. I know you two were still talking, still seeing each other behind my back. You think I wouldn't find out? Now she's disappeared, and you're going to tell me where she is." He shoved me back, his eyes blazing with fury. "I haven't seen her, Greg." "Not since," he faltered, a look of anguish passing over his face. "Not since Emily showed me those damn emails." I paused, studying him. There was something raw in his voice, something that almost sounded like sincerity. But I couldn't let myself believe it, not after everything. "So you have no idea?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "None at all." "No," he breathed, shaking his head. "I swear, after the board meeting, everything fell apart. Emily's leaving me, and now—" He ran a hand through his hair, his shoulders slumping. "I thought Lisa had gone back to her family or something. I didn't think—" His words cut off, and a cold, creeping realization settled over me. He wasn't lying. He didn't know. And that meant Lisa was truly out there, alone or worse. "Get out," Tom said suddenly, his voice breaking the silence. "Just get the hell out of my house, Greg. We're done." I turned to leave, but something stopped me. An urge, dark and insistent, gnawed at the edges of my mind. I wasn't finished. Not yet. "No," I said softly, turning back to face him. "We're not." Before he could react, I pulled out my phone and hit play on a recording I'd saved, a compilation of every damning conversation between him and Lisa. His voice, low and intimate, mingled with hers. Words of love, promises of a future together. But it was the final clip that made him go pale. Lisa's trembling confession about the pregnancy. Tom staggered back, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. How did you? "It doesn't matter how," I cut in. "What matters is that I have it. And I'm going to use it." His eyes widened in horror. "Greg, please." "Don't beg," I snapped. "It's pathetic." I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "You're going to tell me everything you know, every lie you told, every plan you made with her. And if you don't—" I let the threat hang in the air, watching as realization dawned on his face. He glanced around wildly as if looking for an escape, but there was none. Not anymore. "Fine," he whispered, his voice hollow. "Fine. I'll tell you." We sat across from each other in silence, the tension between us taut as a wire. He started to talk, hesitantly at first, then faster, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. He spoke of late-night meetings, secret emails, the dreams they'd shared of a life without their spouses. But it was the next part that made my blood run cold. "Lisa didn't want to leave you," Tom said, his voice trembling. "She kept saying she needed more time, that she wasn't ready. I pushed her, told her it was now or never. But she kept pulling back." "What are you saying?" I demanded, my heart pounding in my ears. He swallowed hard. "She didn't want to end the pregnancy, Greg. That was my idea. I thought it would make things simpler. But she never forgave me for it." My vision blurred with rage. "You made her—" "I didn't make her do anything," he shouted, his voice cracking. "But she blamed me, and after it was done, she couldn't look at me the same way." That's when everything started falling apart. I stood abruptly, my hands clenched into fists. This whole time, I'd thought Lisa was the one pulling the strings, the one who'd destroyed our life without a second thought. But it was him. Tom had pushed her, manipulated her. He was the architect of it all. "Where is she, Tom?" I asked again, my voice dangerously calm. He shook his head. I don't know. I swear I don't. I stared at him, my mind racing. I believed him, but that didn't change the fact that Lisa was gone. And if she'd truly disappeared, if she'd done something irreversible, a new fear gripped me. Had I driven her to this? Had my quest for revenge pushed her too far? I turned and left without another word, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Outside, I took a deep breath, the crisp night air doing little to calm the storm inside me. I needed to find her, to know, one way or another, if she was still out there. But first, I had one more person to confront. Emily. I drove to her house, the tires screeching as I pulled up to the curb. The porch light was on, casting a pale glow over her front yard. I banged on the door, not caring if I woke the whole neighborhood. Emily opened the door cautiously, her face pale and drawn. Greg? What's going on? Lisa's gone, well, I said flatly, pushing past her into the living room. And I need to know what you did. She blinked, confusion marring her features. What I did? What are you talking about? Don't play innocent, Emily. You knew about everything, about the pregnancy, about Tom's manipulations. You had to have known where she would go. Emily shook her head slowly, her eyes wide with shock. I didn't know she was missing. I thought she was with you. Her genuine bewilderment made my chest tighten. She wasn't lying, but if Emily didn't know, and Tom didn't know, then where was she? I sank onto the couch, the weight of it all crashing down on me. Had I really been so blinded by revenge that I hadn't seen this coming? I'd wanted Lisa to suffer, but not like this. Not to the point where she'd disappear without a trace. I didn't want this, Emily whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. I just wanted him to pay, to feel the same pain I felt. But now, she trailed off and we sat there in silence, two broken people staring at the ruins we'd created. What do we do now? She asked softly, her voice trembling. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that I needed to find Lisa, to end this once and for all. We find her, I murmured, more to myself than to Emily. We make sure she's safe. And then, I didn't know. Maybe it was over. Maybe it wasn't. But for the first time, I wasn't sure if revenge was what I wanted anymore. I just wanted closure. For both of us. In the weeks that followed, I kept expecting to get a call, the kind of call that would make everything real. The police, perhaps. Or a hospital, or even a stranger on the other end telling me that Lisa had been found. But that call never came. Days bled into weeks, and still there was no sign of her. Nothing except for the aching, suffocating silence. I drove out to the places she used to go, parks we'd once visited together, restaurants she'd loved, but it was as if she'd been swallowed by the earth. No trace, no breadcrumbs to follow. Just a hollow absence that echoed every time I stepped into the house we'd shared. It was over. But there was no closure, no relief in victory. The revenge I'd planned, the destruction I'd orchestrated, it all felt meaningless now. I'd wanted to watch her unravel, but instead, it was me who was fraying at the seams. A hollow victory, tainted with regret and a sense of loss I hadn't anticipated. I wasn't sure when it started, the nightmares. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, accusing, lost, afraid. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my heart hammering in my chest. Some nights I heard her voice echoing in the stillness of the house, calling my name, pleading. Other nights, I saw her standing at the foot of the bed, staring at me with hollow eyes. Those were the worst. I tried to push through it, to ignore the guilt gnawing at me. I went back to work, but it felt different now, like I was just going through the motions. People spoke to me in hushed tones, their eyes full of pity. They knew something had happened, but no one dared to ask. I couldn't bring myself to care. Tom and Emily's lives continued to unravel. Tom's house went up for sale, a small for sale sign appearing on his lawn one morning as I drove past. I didn't know where he'd gone, didn't ask. Emily moved out of state, taking the remnants of their broken marriage with her. She left a brief message on my phone the night before she left, her voice a low murmur. Take care of yourself, Greg, she said. We both need to move on. It's time. And that was it. No apologies, no lingering bitterness, just a quiet resignation that felt more like surrender. I deleted the message and stood there for a long time, staring at my phone, unsure of what I'd expected to feel. In the end, it was just nothing. But something shifted in me after that call. Maybe it was Emily's words, or maybe it was the realization that there was no more revenge left to take, no more moves on the board, just empty space stretching out in front of me. For so long, I'd defined myself by my anger, my need to make Lisa and Tom pay. But now there was only the aftermath, an endless quiet that I didn't know how to fill. I took time off work, told them I needed to clear my head, to figure out what came next. They were understanding, of course. They always are when someone's life falls apart. I spent the days walking through the city, avoiding the places Lisa and I had frequented, sticking to the parts that felt new and foreign, places that didn't remind me of the life I'd once had. One evening, I found myself standing at the edge of a small park by the waterfront, staring out at the dark, churning water. The wind whipped around me, stinging my face, but I barely noticed. All I could think about was how lost I felt, how adrift I'd become without the anchor of my anger. Lisa was gone. Whether she'd left on her own or met some other fate, I'd probably never know. I'd lost her in more ways than I could count, and the realization twisted something deep inside me. But did I really want to find her now? What would I even say if I did? Would there be accusations, apologies, or just a silent acknowledgement that we destroyed each other? I turned away from the water, breathing deeply. It was time to let go, to walk away from the wreckage I'd created, even if it meant leaving the last pieces of my marriage behind. Maybe I'd never get the answers I wanted, but that didn't mean I had to remain trapped in this endless cycle of regret and revenge. I started small, put the house up for sale. I didn't want to live in those rooms anymore, haunted by the shadows of what we'd once been. I cleared out her things, boxed up the memories we'd made together. Some I donated, others I simply threw away. It felt like severing a lifeline, cutting through the tangled mess of our shared history, but I knew it had to be done. A few weeks later, I moved into a modest apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much, bare walls, unfamiliar surroundings, but it was mine, a clean slate, devoid of any lingering traces of Lisa's presence. I started focusing on myself, cooking meals for one, going to the gym, trying to rebuild a sense of normalcy that had been shattered long ago. I reconnected with old friends, people I hadn't spoken to since before everything fell apart. There were awkward conversations at first, hesitations as they tried to gauge who I'd become. But slowly, those walls began to crumble. They invited me out to dinners, casual gatherings where I could forget, just for a little while, who I was and what I'd done. Each day was a small step forward. A fragile hope began to take root inside me, growing slowly but steadily. I started sleeping better, the nightmares fading into a distant murmur. There were still bad days, moments when I'd wake up expecting to see Lisa next to me, only to remember she was gone, but they were becoming less frequent. I was learning to live with the emptiness, to accept it as a part of me. Months passed, and with each one I felt a little lighter, a little less burdened by the weight of my past. I found myself smiling more, even laughing at times. It wasn't a full return to happiness, whatever that word meant, but it was something, a flicker of light in the darkness. One morning I took a long look at myself in the bathroom mirror. The man staring back at me was different, thinner, wearier, but there was something else there too. A calmness, a quiet resilience that hadn't been there before. I thought of Lisa, of everything I'd done to her, everything she'd done to me, and for the first time I didn't feel anger or bitterness, just a strange, hollow sort of acceptance. It was time to let her go, time to stop chasing ghosts. I picked up my phone, scrolling through the contacts until I found her name. It felt like an eternity since I'd last spoken to her, but her number was still there, waiting. I hesitated, then tapped delete contact. A confirmation box popped up, asking if I was sure. I stared at it for a moment, then pressed yes. Her name vanished from the screen, and just like that, she was gone from my life. I set the phone down, breathing out slowly. It felt final, like closing a chapter I'd been clinging to for too long. I wasn't erasing her. Our past was still there, etched into every scar and bruise, but I was choosing to move forward, to live again, without the constant shadow of her betrayal. As I stood by the window staring out at the city below, I felt a strange sense of peace. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the buildings, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold. A new day would come, and with it, new possibilities. I didn't know where Lisa was, or if I'd ever see her again. Maybe she was out there somewhere starting over. Maybe she wasn't. But wherever she was, I hoped she'd find her own peace too. We'd both lost so much in the end, more than I'd ever imagined. But it was time to stop looking back. The future stretched out before me, uncertain and full of questions. But for the first time in a long while, I wasn't afraid. I was ready to face it. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past lift just a little. It was a start, one small step, one new beginning.